Hello and welcome to Ravenna Railfan 4070. Tonight I have a special treat for you guys, my own personal ghost story, the Phantom Train of the NorthEastern Line.
Engineer Jeff Willard was just coming in for the night shift. His engine, a 10-wheeler called the Old 17, had been assigned to a local freight train, and the yardmaster had needed an engineer to run her to her destination. It was late on a cold, misty night as Willard climbed into the cabin. Fireman Smokey Anderson was already waiting and was stoking up Old 17's fire. A full moon shone over the tracks, casting an eerie glow in the distance. Old 17 pulled out, and the local climbed slowly upward, twisting through the mountain pass. To the engineer, everything seemed normal, except for the fact that beside the noise of the Old 17 working, it was quiet, too quiet. The train climbed its way up the old trestle bridge where the crew sounded the whistle. The whistle echoed around, breaking the eerie silence of the cold, foggy night and causing a sense of unease. "What are our orders for tonight?" the fireman asked. "We're to meet train number 23 at the next junction beyond this bridge," Willard replied. As the 17 rolled past the bridge, Willard saw a flashing red light ahead. At first he thought it was the end of a train device and slowed his train down. Willard blew a long, loud whistle to warn the train ahead that he was approaching. Again, an exact echo of Old 17's whistle shrieked back. It was now that Willard noticed that the flashing red light did not seem to be going any further away, and though he knew the signals should not flicker, the engineer began to look for ones. "See any signals?" he inquired of the fireman. "No, sir, I don't see any," Anderson reported. "But if that isn't a signal, what is it?" "That's what we're going to find out," Willard decided. While the two men tried to figure out the situation ahead, they had slowed Old 17 to a stop. Both men waited with growing tension and then noticed that the flashing red light ahead was starting to move. But something was terribly wrong. If the red light was coming from an end of train device, the train ahead on the track should be moving forward. But Old 17's crew soon panicked when they realized that the red light was coming in reverse toward their position. Willard feared a wreck, but could now see that the light was on the other track. Something was still wrong. This should not be happening. A high whistle broke out in a scream, and all of a sudden Old 17's crew could now see that the red light was attached to the front of a gleaming white train that was speeding their way. Willard noticed a figure on the roof of the barreling white train who was the same ghostly color, laughing maniacally, and immediately looked away. The engine of the white train flew past and screamed again with its high whistle. Old Jack Silman, the brakeman on Old 17's freight that night, was terrified to see the white train coming his way, for once again the laughing figure had appeared on the engine's roof. From his position in the caboose, Silman could not believe what he was seeing. The figure on the roof of the white train turned and looked him straight in the eye. Silman soon found it hard to take his eye off the rooftop figure and didn't know why. The solid white train raced past Old 17's freight and continued to the old bridge. With an awful lurch, Silman could feel the caboose disconnect from the back of the train as if it had been pulled by a supernatural hand. The caboose rolled parallel to the mysterious white train, and in a desperate effort, Silman tried to apply the brake, but it was no use. The caboose refused to do so and kept freely rolling. The mysterious white train reached the bridge with far too much speed, and with a mighty creak, the old trestle gave way. The white train plunged down to the ravine far below. Jack Silman watched out of the rear window of the caboose, horrified as the caboose approached. He tried to brake again, but nothing happened, and he called for help as loud as he could. Unfortunately, there was no way the engineer and the fireman could hear him. Silman spotted his radio and reached for it, but it fell off the table it had been sitting on. Silman realized too late that the reason the radio had come off the desk was because the caboose was going over the edge. Silman climbed back to the back of the caboose and threw the door open. He tossed a lantern in front of him to see the edge of the bridge. Silman jumped, but his outstretched arms could not reach the bridge, and he tumbled down to the ravine. falling back through the open door of the caboose. The caboose splashed into the river with the exception of a single ladder, which was knocked loose in the fall that landed on the riverbank. Unaware of the chaos behind them, Engineer Jeff Willard and Fireman Smokey Anderson sat dazed in the cabin, trying to make sense of what had just happened. They had not felt the caboose disconnect and had no idea that it now lay in the gorge with their brakeman, old Jack Silman, inside. Anderson was the first to speak. "What just happened?" I don't know. I've never seen any train like that," Willard managed. "And why in the name of railroading was the end of the train device on the front?" Anderson asked. "I'm afraid I can't answer that either," Willard answered, concerned. Did you see that figure on top of the train?" "No, sir, I can't say I saw anyone," Anderson replied. "You saw someone?" "I saw a man the same color white as that train, laughing maniacally on the roof of the engine's cabin," Willard explained, seemingly deep in thought. "How come you were the only one to see him?" Anderson inquired. "It must have been my imagination. The train looked so strange that my mind must have been playing tricks on me," Willard decided. "Sir?" said Anderson. "What is it, Smokey?" Willard asked. "We had better be going soon. The 23 is still waiting for us at the junction," Anderson reminded. "Yes, we should thank you, Smokey," Willard agreed. It was not long before Old 17 was back underway to meet the 23. The freight soon reached a downhill, and Willard found that Old 17 was accelerating quite fast going down the grade and slowed her throttle. "We shouldn't be going that fast with a caboose on the train to help with the braking," he observed. "No, we shouldn't," Anderson agreed. The Old 17 reached the bottom of the grade, and Willard opened her up again. The train traveled for about another 10 minutes before approaching the junction where the rendezvous with the 23 was supposed to take place. Willard eased Old 17 down to a stop and looked around for the 23. She was nowhere in sight. "I'll go take a look for her. She's probably stopped around that bend over yonder," Anderson decided. He climbed down backwards out of the cabin and walked over to the sidetrack. Anderson didn't see 23's headlight, and so he walked a little further in case it had been shut off. There was no sign of the 23, and thoroughly confused, he climbed back up into the cabin. "Well, where is she?" Willard inquired. "She's not here. The 23's not here," Anderson answered in panic. "Sure, it's a strange night, but maybe we beat her here. Let's give her about 10 minutes, Willard replied. After a while had passed, Willard checked his watch. "Well, it's been 10 minutes. Let's go up to the next station and see if they know what's going on." Old 17 took off again and followed the track until Willard saw a station. He eased the engine to a stop once again, and Anderson climbed down from the cabin and went inside. "What's the situation, Anderson?" the station master inquired. "Well, sir, Engineer Jeff Willard and I were coming up past the old bridge with Old 17 when we saw this strange flashing red light, which turned out to be the front of a solid white train," Anderson answered. "The front?" the station master repeated. "Yes, sir, that's what made it so strange," Anderson replied. "Smokey, we both know that flashing red lights only come from the back of trains," the station master said skeptically. "Well, I can tell that's not the full extent of your problem," the station master noted. "Well, after our encounter with the strange train, we were supposed to meet 23 at the next junction beyond the bridge, Anderson continued. "And," prodded the station master, "we reached the junction and there was no sign of the 23. We looked around and waited 10 minutes, but there was still no sign of her, so we came here," Anderson finished. "I see. Well, I shall look into this for you. Tell Willard to take Old 17 on the sidetrack and back her into the yard for the night. I'll have the express take you boys home tonight and bring you back in the morning. She's due in about 15 minutes, the station master decided. "Thank you, sir. Good night," Anderson replied and started to walk out. "Good night, Anderson," the station master called. Anderson climbed back up in the cabin of Old 17 and relayed the station master's orders to Willard. The switch was flipped and Old 17 backed her cars into a small switching yard for the night. A worker in the yard came up to the engine. "Where's your caboose?" he asked. "My caboose?" repeated Willard. "Yes, your train doesn't have one," the yard worker replied. "It doesn't?" Anderson cried in alarm. "I've been having to keep the engine down since our stop at the trestle," Willard commented thoughtfully. It must have somehow disconnected from the back of the train there. Old man Silman was in the caboose, Anderson realized. Just then a whistle sounded. The express had arrived and Willard and Anderson had to go. Tell the station master we have to catch the express, Anderson called. The yard worker rushed to the station. The engineer and fireman raced to the express and climbed up into one of the coaches. The express whistled and pulled out, but followed a different route back and did not go by way of the destroyed trestle. That night, both men had trouble sleeping, especially Jeff Willard, who not only had experienced the horror of losing track of the caboose and Jack Silman, but also not being able to find the 23 and seeing the strange figure on the mysterious white train. The next morning, when Willard and Anderson stepped off the express, the station master met them with the most disturbing news. Well, I'm afraid I have some bad news. A work train was heading up in the line last night after the express took you home and found the old trestle collapsed. Willard and Anderson exchanged bewildered glances. We just crossed it last night, Willard commented. So I hear, and that's where you met this mysterious white train with an end-of-train device on the front, the station master asked. Indeed, Willard nodded, shivering in remembrance. What about the caboose? Anderson inquired. We sent engines to look for it on both sides of the bridge and it came up empty, except for this, the station master replied and held up a brakeman's lantern. Where was that? Willard questioned. Right on the edge of the broken bridge, the station master answered. Your thoughts? Willard prodded. Crews estimated that the caboose somehow detached and rolled back to where the bridge was and fell through the gap, or possibly was the cause of the collapse. They think Jack Silman tried to jump to the remainder of the bridge, explaining the lantern, and threw it across ahead of him so he could see, but he did not make the jump, but the lantern did. So Brakeman Silman is where exactly? Anderson asked. We believe he's dead, Smokey. He went down to the caboose. With the caboose. One of the ladders was knocked loose in the process and hit the riverbank, but just in case, the men are going to drag the river for both the caboose and his body later today, the station master reported. That is all our fault, Willard moaned. We must have done something wrong to make the caboose disconnect. I'm sure it's not your fault, Jeff, but we do need to find out what did make it uncouple and what made the bridge collapse, assured the station master. You look troubled. What's on your mind? Sir, I find it hard to believe that the weight of a single caboose could collapse the old trestle. It was getting very weak, but just a few minutes before the accident would have occurred, our entire train made it across with no problem, Willard explained. I'll have to take this new information into consideration. Meanwhile, why don't you leave your freight here for now and head back with Old 17 on the express route, the station master proposed. Sounds good, sir. Thank you. Willard agreed, and he climbed into the Old 17 with Anderson. Once Anderson had Old 17 stoked up, Willard whistled, and Old 17 pulled out on her return journey. Willard didn't mention it, but he was glad they would not be traveling near the bridge, that they were traveling in the daytime, and that they were traveling in the daytime. Anderson was also trying to make sense of the prior night's events, but tried to keep his mind off the subject by putting all his effort into shoveling coal into the engine's firebox. When Old 17 returned home, the crew was assigned to assemble a few more freights and a passenger train for bigger engines, and when the work was finally through, Willard and Anderson put her away in the roundhouse. Both men entered the railroad foreman's office as he had requested to see them. I was told about your incident last night. Crews have dragged the river and have found no trace of your missing caboose or brakeman Jack Silman anywhere. I want to hear what happened from you two personally. Well, sir, Willard began, we were taking a freight train up past the old trestle bridge last night with Old 17. We had just crossed the trestle when we had to stop the train because we saw one of the new end-of-train devices flashing on something ahead. We waited and it didn't move, so we looked for a signal, but there were none. All of a sudden, there was this loud roar, and the light advanced towards us on the front of a solid white train. It passed us on the other track going much too fast, and somehow, while we were watching, we lost the caboose, Willard continued. From there, we were supposed to go up to the next junction and meet up with train number 23, but it never showed. So we dropped the freight off at the mixed traffic station up the line and came back today, Anderson added. Train 23, the railroad foreman seemed puzzled. Yes, sir, Anderson nodded. There is no train number 23 on this line, the foreman replied. No train 23, Willard exclaimed. But, sir, we had orders straight from the yardmaster himself, Anderson insisted. Well, we did have a number 23 at one point, but 10 years ago, last night, 23 violently derailed just past the old trestle bridge and was never run on the Northeastern again. It was a night similar to last night, cold, dark, foggy. Crews made up some strange story about the ghost of the 23 taking revenge because it was never run again, and they say that it ensures that no train could go further than it had, its engineer laughing on top. But of course, it's just a legend. All trains have gone through that area safely since, the foreman explained. It's no legend, sir. What we saw last night could not have been anything else but the ghost of 23, Willard decided. How else could a caboose that was firmly coupled uncouple and roll away without our notice? And a bridge that we crossed safely suddenly collapsed, Anderson added. Don't be ridiculous. Trains don't come back as ghosts, the foreman protested. But the engineer could, and he was in the train during that wreck. Everything that you explained happened last night, Willard continued. And that also explains why the train we were supposed to meet never showed up. We had met the 23 out there on the main line, and it had passed us then, Anderson reasoned. I don't know what scared you two so much, but you had better go home and try to get some sleep to clear your minds, the foreman advised. Both men got up and did as they were told, but as soon as they were gone, the foreman started to wonder if they could actually have been right. That night there was another full moon. It was cold and dark, and mist was rising from the ravine below what remained of the old trestle. A group of workmen had taken a train through the switchback and gone back down the river line so they could check out the base of the bridge to inspect the damage. When it happened, all of a sudden, the workmen could hear the noise of a train rolling along the rails. The workmen were terrified, but no sooner had they heard this than a strange flashing red light appeared. A loud, high whistle broke out. It was a whistle that had not been heard by any Northeastern Railroad worker in 10 years. The 23 and its cars appeared in the same solid white color, and a figure was standing on the roof laughing. But this time, something was different behind the last coach rode a caboose, with none other than the ghost of Jack Silman leaning out of the side, waving a lantern. The workmen were terrified and ran for the inspection coach, waiting behind their train on the lower line. The next morning, Jeff Willard and Smokey Anderson came in and pulled Old 17 out of the roundhouse. Willard noticed that even though the engine had spent the night in the roundhouse, one of the windows was fogged up, and upon looking closer, Willard thought he saw writing. Anderson stepped down to put water in the tender, and Willard read the message. Old man Silman warns you, the 23 showed itself last night and 2 nights ago, as you saw. He made the mistake of looking me in the eye. Run this line again and you will suffer this fate. Signed, the engineer of the 23. Willard was so frightened that he left his job at the Northeastern Line and joined the Pennsylvania Railroad. His friend and fireman Smokey Anderson followed suit 3 weeks later. To this day, no one has ever found the body of Jack Silman or the caboose that somehow uncoupled from Old 17's train. It is said that on a cold, dark, foggy night with the full moon, you can see Silman's caboose riding along the back of the 23's train, but the phantom never reaches the other side of the bridge.